with two panelists who are both military veterans and photographers. And then at 8 o'clock, we will segue to a more general Q&A with the audience. However, during that time, we invite you to use the chat, share any thoughts, questions, and connections with us and with the panelists. And so, also, I wanted to thank all of you who have registered so far and who kindly gave a donation. Your donations help to keep educational programs like this free and low cost for our communities. And for those of you who are joining and who are able to do so, we invite you to consider making a gift today to, again, help us fund panels like this virtual parlor chat. If you are interested, we invite you to either text, we'll put this information in the chat as well as follow the links to donate. And in addition to this, this panel is being held in conjunction with an upcoming exhibition called At Ease: Photographs by Military Veterans in New York, which will open on June 16th and will be on view at Morris-Jumel Mansion until September 11th. We are also hosting an open house with some of the photographers and teaching artists who have contributed to the show. And we also invite you to join us on site on June 18th from 1 to 3 p.m., where you'll get a chance to meet and speak with some of the artists and see the show. For those of you who have younger aspiring photographers, we also invite you to our monthly Con Edison Family Day with artist Rose Deller on June 12th. She will be making sun prints. So let's hope for good weather and that the sun will shine on that day. Okay, so briefly, I wanted to lay the foundation for tonight's conversation. So on the screen, you will see exterior photograph of Morris-Jumel Mansion, where I work, and which is a historic landmark that is the oldest remaining house in Manhattan. So if you can believe it, it is the original house in its original location, as for the most part, as it was constructed in 1765. So it predates the United States, and the land that it's on, obviously even older than that, the unceded ancestral homeland of the Lenape people. Many illustrious military veterans have used the house as a headquarters or somehow passed through its doors. So it was a natural fit for us to collaborate with Josephine Herrick Project and host some of the photographs created by veterans working with them and with the Harlem Veterans Center. A few of the veterans who have wandered the halls of Morris-Jumel Mansion include, oh, I'll come back to that later, include, yes, George Washington, actually, he's portrayed here in this painting with his body servant, an enslaved man known as William Lee. And both Lee and Washington spent 5 weeks using the house as a headquarters in September and October of 1776. There's also two rivals who are a bit infamous, especially due to the musical Hamilton. At the top, you can see Aaron Burr, who actually was the second husband of the longest resident of the mansion, Eliza Jumel. She subsequently divorced him after a matter of months. That is a story for another topic, another time. And below him, of course, Burr is always associated with Alexander Hamilton, whom he killed in a duel. Alexander Hamilton was actually at the house in 1790 as part of a dinner thrown by then President Washington for the people who would be in his cabinet, including the man who would become Secretary of War, General Henry Knox. But this is just the continental side. Of course, Washington's stay at the mansion was a bit short-lived. And when he and the Continentals pulled out, of course, the British and the Hessians also came and used the house as a headquarters for the rest of the war. Shown first, actually, on the left, is the man for whom the house was originally built, Colonel Roger Morris, who was a British colonel who married Mary Phillips Morris, a moneyed Anglo-Dutch heiress. And the house was built most likely with enslaved labor for them as a summer house, not even a full-time house, if you can imagine. So after the Americans left, other generals like Sir Henry Clinton used the house as a headquarters, and Hessian General von Knyphausen. There's also connections with the Civil War as well. So the first caretaker of the house, once it was founded as a museum by the 4 branches of the Daughters of the American Revolution, the first caretaker hired to live in and do upkeep for the house was actually a woman by the name of Katie Brownell, shown here. And she and her husband both fought during the Civil War, both received pensions for their service in the Rhode Island Infantry. On the far right is the first curator of the mansion. And he also served in the Union Army, William Henry Shelton. And then in the middle, we have a flag representing the 26th Regiment of New York, which was a Black infantry regiment in which Alonzo Northup served. And the Northups have a connection with the house as well. Alonzo's father, the memoirist of 12 Years a Slave, Solomon Northup, after he was kidnapped and sold into slavery in the South, Alonzo, his 2 sisters, and his mother actually lived and worked in the mansion for a time in the 1840s. So, and then last but not least, yet another man with military connections shown in the bottom center is General Ferdinand Earl, who also served in the Civil War, and he and his wife Lily were the last residents of the mansion when it was a private house. So again, as I was saying to the panelists earlier, the more you look, the more connections there are at the mansion to people who have served on behalf of their country. And with that, well, past to present. And before I introduce tonight's main speaker, again, I wanted to remind everyone to come join us and see the upcoming exhibition At Ease, Photographs by Military Veterans in New York, presented in partnership with Josephine Herrick Project, which will be on view beginning June 16th. All right. Give me a second. Here we are. All right. So With that said, I am delighted this evening to introduce Miriam Leuchtter. Miriam is the executive director of Josephine Herrick Project, a New York-based nonprofit that teaches photography in a host of underserved communities. And she is also an independent editorial and photography consultant, journalist, and educator. She is the former editor-in-chief of Popular Photography and American Photo, and author of, and I love this title, Take Your Best Shot, Essential Tips and Tricks for Shooting Amazing Photos. Please join me in welcoming Miriam Leuchtter.
Thank you so much, Megan, and thank you to the Morris-Jumel Mansion for inviting us to be part of this program and hosting our exhibition and putting the work of our program participants on view. I'm really excited about the upcoming show, and once again want to welcome everybody to it. I'm going to share a little presentation about the Josephine Herrick Project because it's probably a name that you're not familiar with. Many of you may not have heard of us, although we've been here in New York doing what we do for some 80 years. So I will step you through that. So, oh, and also while I'm thanking everybody, I also wanted to thank everyone for being here, both live in the webinar and later if you're watching this either live streamed or recorded. I really appreciate your joining us tonight. But our story really begins with Josephine Herrick. She was just a remarkable woman who, like so many other New Yorkers, moved to the city from her hometown, got out of her hometown of Cleveland as soon as she could, came to New York. And but before she did that, actually, she volunteered during the Great War, as the First World War used to be known during her time. She volunteered as a nurse working with wounded veterans. And I think that really set her up for her interest in working with this group of people who have served their country. But, after nursing, she realized she didn't actually want to be a nurse. She wanted to be a photographer. And she went to photo school, and then she moved to New York and started a business with a partner in a studio, primarily doing portraits, but really all the work that she could get. During the Second World War, she started, and actually a little bit before it began, she started photographing sailors and soldiers in the canteens in New York, and then sending those photographs home to their families. For many people, it was the first formal portrait that they may have ever had. And helped them to stay in touch with their families before they shipped overseas. And she recruited a whole bunch of her friends to do that too, other photographers, and she built around herself a whole cadre of volunteer photographers, both in New York and in other places around the country, other major ports of embarkation, and really started creating a network that she would draw upon further on. She also taught courses in defense photography to service personnel. So as America entered the war, she started teaching photography to servicemen under the auspices of the War Service Photography Division of the American Women's Voluntary Services. So she was, as a volunteer, with other volunteers, started teaching photography during the war. But as these guys started returning home wounded, she shifted her focus to using photography as a rehabilitative process for veterans, working in, for instance, working in the military hospital in St. Albans, Queens. She photographed them and she taught photography there with some people who were really unable to even get out of their beds. And she again recruited others to work with her. She founded her own peacetime organization called Volunteer Service Photographers. And that organization is what would someday become the Josephine Herrick Project. She kept doing this kind of work during with veterans through the Korean and Vietnam Wars. And her work garnered so much attention throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s that she expanded her programs to civilian hospitals, where she worked with terminally ill and disabled populations, with schools, with senior centers, and with substance abuse centers. Her organization was renamed Rehabilitation Through Photography. Josephine Herrick died in 1972, but her colleagues continued her work and eventually renamed the organization in her honor. While we began with programs for veterans, today we serve a wide array of audiences, from children with disabilities to immigrant teens who are learning English to people of all ages who live in public housing. But we still use photography as a venue, as a vehicle rather, for transforming lives. We base everything that we do on our vision of skills, voice, and inclusivity, and really like to focus and do focus on our mission to amplify unrepresented voices through photography, giving people the tools to see differently, communicate across cultures, and advocate for themselves and their community. So that's it. I mean, we couldn't do it without you. You know, you can donate on our website, jhproject.org/donate. Come visit us there. And I really wanted to give another thank you in particular to the sponsors of tonight's panel and the programs that we've been doing this year with veterans, and are helping to fund the show that we're doing at the Morris-Jumel Mansion. And they are the Philip and Edith Meonian Foundation and the New York City Council's Veterans Community Development Initiative, which operates through the Department of Youth and Community Development. So that's it. Take any questions if you'd like before we start the panel, if you have questions about Josephine Herrick.
Just including something in the chat here. It looks like there are many people joining who are very familiar with your work, including teaching artists, board members, which is great, which is wonderful. I'm curious, Miriam, how did you become involved with the Josephine Herrick Project?
I became involved when I was the editor of Popular Photography, and a friend of mine called up, actually a friend of a friend, and said, I'm working with this organization that you should know about. And I said, who the heck are they? And that's how I got involved. She told me about it. She was running programs at the time. And this was about a little more than 10 years ago, about 11 years ago. And I checked it out and said, this is really for me. And I started writing about it, and then joined the organization's advisory council, which is a very sort of informal way to get involved as a volunteer, especially when you don't have the time to actually volunteer as a teaching artist, which I didn't at the time. And just really loved what I saw, and eventually was asked to join the board. And I joined the board about 10 years ago, and I've been executive director for the past almost 2.5 years.
Fantastic. And I mean, I used to work at the National World War II Museum, and I'm kind of shocked that I was not familiar with Josephine Herrick before our partnership, our institutional partnership. And why do you necessarily think that is the case?
I think that Josephine Herrick was actually so dedicated to service in a lot of ways that she didn't spend time promoting herself and promoting her own work as an artist. I think once she started really working organizationally and with teaching, a lot of her own photography took a backseat to the work that she was doing for the community. And she was just doing the work and not really promoting herself. And I think that one of the reasons that we decided to rename the organization in her honor was to try to get her more well-known as a person, as a photographer, as a member of the New York City community, and as somebody who really believed in service to others.
Speaking of service, I'm wondering if you would like to segue and introduce our panelists to open up the conversation.
I would love to. Thanks. Well, I'm pleased to welcome two people to join me on the panel. First, Vernon Hall. Vernon Hall is a U.S. Army veteran. He's a member of the Harlem Vet Center and lives in Asbury Park. He works for the New Jersey Hospital Association as a veteran healthcare advocate. And I can show some work of Vernon's before we introduce our other panelists. Let me just get that queued up. Let's see. Oh, hold on a second. I'm not ready to do it. Sorry about that, everybody. There we go. I didn't realize that I was still sharing, but let's just go through. Actually, I started with Alberto, so let me introduce Alberto before we move along. Alberto Vasari is a New York-based photographer and Marine Corps veteran. He's a longtime teaching artist with Josephine Herrick Project and is honored to be a current board member, and we're honored to have him. And since I actually put the slides in the opposite order, I'm going to start by showing some of Alberto's work and then a little bit of Vernon's, and then we'll get to talking. So, and Alberto, feel free to jump in and tell us about these photos if you'd like to go along.
Yeah, this is some work that I shot of some UFC fighters. One of my other passions aside from photography, growing up, I was always interested in martial arts. So it's one of the things I've really enjoyed about being a photographer is being able to marry it with some of the other things that I really enjoy in life. Namely, I think two of the big things are music and martial arts, sports, athletics. And it's kind of been great because that camera serves as a key to get me in some doors and meet some really interesting people and spend some time around them and learn. This was in a project that I was doing in Mexico with a mentor of mine who I always admired, since before I ever even moved to New York, and that's Mark Seliger. And he brought me along with him on a trip to Mexico. We took 2 trips down there, one for scouting, and then another project that we were shooting with Lenny Kravitz. So that was really an adventure, and I was honored to be there and shooting alongside him. He was directing motion, so they asked me to come along board and shoot the stills for the campaign. So that was exciting. And this was a shot that I took of him, kind of surveying the land. This is George St Pierre. He was a perennial champion in the UFC and just an all around just amazing human being. Just a great guy. Wow, there's Lenny on stage. Again, just the camera and photography. It's introduced me to so many amazing people. There's an old John Denver song called "This Old Guitar," where he talks about all the great things that his guitar brought him. It's the heartbreak also, but all the great things. And it's funny because I really identify with that song because I think about that with my cameras. I don't know why, but I always love silhouettes. No matter where I am in the world, whether it's Japan or just any place. I'm actually leaving for Africa on Monday for 2 weeks, and for some reason, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a yin and yang thing, or I don't know. There's something about it that I just really love. I love a good silhouette. Yeah, that was in Mexico, and if you yeah, I don't know if you can see those stars, but I mean, just the files that I was shooting. I mean, it's just really crazy and humbling to be out there in the desert, you know, in the middle of the night with, you know, no light pollution, and just looking up at all those stars and just thinking about how small we are.
A special timer setting or some way to capture the stars?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because you would be amazed at, I mean, we're moving so fast, you know, we're moving so fast through space, and, you know, the rotation of the earth and everything, that you actually cannot do that long of an exposure before the stars start blurring and streaking. I mean, literally like 30 seconds and they're going to start looking smeared.
Wow.
So I shot that with a medium format camera that has really, really high resolution, and you know, is maybe a 12-second exposure, 10-second exposure or something, but more than that, and you start seeing the motion and starts dragging and smearing the stars. So yeah, that's a great question. That's a really good friend of mine, Gavin, who's just an incredible musician and just an amazing friend. And I was working on a project that he was recording his most recent album. And it was just really personal journey, really personal album, incredible songs. And I was able to spend some good bit of time in the studio when he was recording, and it was in his historic studio down in Nashville. It's RCA Studio A, and you just name anybody, you know, in music, through music history, just so many icons have gone through there and recorded. And he was working with you know, really amazing producer, really successful and just incredible producer, this guy Dave Cobb. And just to see them working together, and, you know, again, it's that key, it's that camera. And you know, I always like that idea that, like, Henri Cartier-Bresson would talk about the decisive moment, and he would also talk about, like, you know, the art of photography being where, you know, the axis of, you know, of your eye, you know, of your eye, your heart, the camera, you know, it all just lines up. And I just, it never gets old for me. I've been shooting for a long time, and used to draw and paint when I was younger. And I would say I'm more in love with the art of photography now than I ever have been. I mean, I love it. I just feel like I'm always learning and always growing, and it's just great. That was down in on the Mexico project, and you know, that was really unique because it brought us to actually the land just north of where my mom grew up. My mom was from a part of Chihuahua, which is massive state in Mexico, and just really beautiful. So it was great that this project kind of brought me back to the land that, you know, where my mom was from. And it was a really beautiful journey for me, again, from that project. So that was same gentleman, a guy named Don Lalo, who they distill spirits down there, and it's incredible, you know, what they do, you know, and how connected they are to the land and to the history down there. It was really nice.
Finally,
again, going back to the music thing, you know, just, I mean, you know, if not for that camera, you know, there's no way that I'm just right up against the stage, you know, with just, you know, one of my musical heroes, and just somebody that I just think is just an amazing human, and he's one of the most incredible songwriters. You know, I think the only way to describe him for me, after I saw him, after I've seen him perform and saw his Broadway show, was, you know, he's just an American treasure. And so to be there and then be able to, you know, shoot backstage and shoot from different angles and beyond, you know, behind the stage, and it's just, it's pretty exciting and pretty amazing.
Thanks, Alberto. And Vernon, I'm going to cue you up next. And you're at a little bit of a disadvantage, so I have to apologize because I chose your pictures. You didn't have a chance to actually choose your own. I don't have quite as many of them on display, but you're actually in the exhibition. Your work will be in there, and so I'm showing one of the pieces that's in there, and the other ones you're going to be surprised by, and maybe you can talk to us a little bit about those too. Not quite as many this time.
Okay.
Let's get that in. There we go. So.
Oh. That is Asbury Park Beach, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. I had my camera and I just decided, I like this shot. There was a series of shots, but yeah, I like this shot.
You called this one the opening, I think.
Yes,
tell us a little bit about
that. Because of the opening between two fences.
Beautiful.
This is a shot of me driving on Eagle Drive, going to my complex. And to me, it was just a beautiful, I like landscape. It was just a nice shot. There's nothing else, to obstruct the shot. I just happen to like it. Oh, this is winter of, let me see, I think it was either 18 or 19 in Asbury Park. They have a lake, Deal Lake. And I just saw the icing and it was just a beautiful shot, I thought.
Beautiful.
I don't remember this one.
I think that this was one of the ones probably from, well, I'm not sure, but I pulled it out of one of our books of participant work and said, I really like this one, put it in there myself. And then this one that's in the exhibition.
Yes. I have tried for a very long time to photograph the sun or the moon, and I saw this and I had my camera, went to the backyard and just took the picture.
Yeah, it's really poetic to me. I was really glad. So thank you for sharing those with us.
You're welcome.
Well, so I figured I would open it up to ask you to both to tell us a little bit about your time in the service. When did you serve? What was it like? How long were you in the military?
Who, me?
Yes, let's start with you, Vernon, and then we'll go there.
I lived in Brooklyn, and my mother and I really didn't get along, so I moved to San Diego with my sister and her husband. And the truth of the matter is, I'm dyslexic and nobody could figure out what was going on. So I decided to join the military. At first, I was going into infantry, airborne, and my first sergeant told me I was crazy for wanting to jump out of an airplane, and I jumped off, practicing jumping off of a high roof, and I hurt my knee, injured my knee. And I had to change my MOS. I couldn't be jumping out of airplanes with messed up knees. So I became, my MOS was 81 Charlie, Corps of Engineers. I was a cartographer. I actually made maps. Back in the 70s, you use a little pen. You take a photograph of whatever area, you take a pen and you draw it out. Did that for a while. Left the military, came back to New York. Got a job in a photography studio making slides, training slides for the VA. Went from that to becoming, back then, if you had a retoucher, a lot of the big 6x6, 4x6 photograph still had little holes in it. So you had to touch it up. went into the dark room, started printing. And from 1983 to 1991, I was in the dark room, creating. A lot of the work that I did was like, was shown in Macy's Lampcone. We did that by hand, and it was just a wonderful experience. And for a while, it wasn't satisfying. After a while, it wasn't satisfying. So I started working with in a rehab. It went from a rehab to working at a homeless shelter, working with vets. But my military experience was good. I met a lot of people I'm still friends with today. Had a lot of, it wasn't in the wartime. The only thing that I was involved in was when that helicopter, when Carter was president, and the helicopter was shot down in Iran, I think, and we had to go there to rescue, and it all messed up. So, but other than that, my military experience was pretty good. One of the biggest mistakes, I think, was not staying for the 20 years.
And Alberto, what about you? Tell us about your service.
So I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17 years old, and had to have my parents co-sign for me to join. And people always ask why I joined the Marine Corps. And I half joke with them and tell them I watched Star Wars too many times, and I couldn't be a Jedi Knight, so I figured I'll go join the Marine Corps and get some adventure and do that. But honestly, I mean, my parents had come from Mexico. We were an immigrant family, and I just felt so grateful for what this country had afforded us, and I wanted to serve. So I grew up in scouting, and it just seemed like the logical next progression. So joined the Marine Corps when I was 17. Went through basic training, and went through School of Infantry and Marine combat training. And that was my, I was infantry. So that was my MOS, and didn't even know that I would get through, because I have a condition where I don't even read with one of my eyes. And so it was really interesting, because I didn't even know if I'd be able to go in. And then I ended up going in, and it was fine. They let me in, but I ended up being a really good shot. I ended up being very good at shooting, and was asked to go to marksmanship instructor school. So really lucky to get to do that and experience that, and go to Quantico, Virginia. And so that became my secondary MOS, and deployed during it was in a long time ago. So I was deployed during the first Persian Gulf War. So we were along the border of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and then went up into Kuwait a bit. And that was just a real, humbling experience, just seeing kind of like just the destruction, and just kind of like I guess the worst that humanity can do to itself. So that was kind of a big awakening at a very young age. I was 19 at that point. And I had a friend of mine who, my best friend, Steve, at the time, who was kind of like my big brother. He looked after me, while we were in. He kind of like, they kind of paired me up with him. And he had this little point and shoot camera. And I used to always just borrow from him. Hey, Steve, can I borrow the camera? Hey, Steve, can I borrow the camera? And I always wanted to just grab the camera. I think back now, and I'm just like, why the hell didn't I take a camera? Or why didn't I like have my own good camera? I don't know. But it just hadn't clicked yet. But Steve was great, and would just be like, yeah, take it. So I shot a ton. I shot just a bunch where I could and when I could. You can't always shoot all the time, but but what I did shoot kind of like stuck with me. And I liked the idea that, because at the time we didn't know that it was going to be that quick of an operation. We didn't know what was going to happen. And we were really lucky. But I mean, when you're there and, you hear bombs going off and feel them going off, and you're looking up and the sky's black from the oil fires, and, you're standing there in the desert with a gas mask on, because, they're telling you there might be some biological stuff going on, you're just listening to yourself breathe and thinking, well, what the hell am I going to do if I go home? And for me, it was, I wanted to go home and pursue something in photography or film, something in the arts. I was always interested in it. And so I did that when I got back, and, it was a great experience. I learned a lot, and, I always liked teaching. And so that ended up kind of turning into something where I got away from the whole military thing for a long time when I got back, and really dove into martial arts and photography. And then, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something like that, probably around then, 8 years ago, not very longer. Someone introduced me to Josephine Herrick project and said, hey, they're looking for, people to work with veterans and teach veterans. And I thought, wow, this is great. I love teaching. I want to get back involved, and I want to give back to the military that gave me so much. And so I got involved with doing some teaching. And ironically, it was funny because the programs that I started teaching at first, I didn't realize they had expanded the mission. And the programs that I was teaching were, I had taught one for kids with autism, some special needs. I taught another one for adults with traumatic brain injuries, some kids in a, I don't know if they would consider them at risk, or the neighborhood was maybe at risk kids, teens. So I was teaching all these programs, and I was thinking, what I signed up for this to help veterans. And in a way it did, though, because, it was helping a veteran. It was just me that it was helping. So, I was the veteran that was being helped through it. But eventually I did get onto some of the veteran programs, and that's been amazing. And, doing that, working on the program, I don't want to jump the gun and get ahead of it on Gettysburg, but,
Let's come to that in a minute, but actually both of you have anticipated a couple of questions that I had. And I think that it really goes to why photography. And Vernon, you were behind the scenes for a long time. What got you to pick up a camera again, and how did you wind up with Josephine Herrick Project as a participant in our classes? What got you back into photography?
Well, my first experience with photography was in elementary school. We had a teacher that helped us to make these little box cameras with a hole in it, and so I got involved with that. But my interest in photography actually grew when I was in the military working as a photographer, because we had to take pictures and develop them and make sure that they lined up with the goal. I forget what it's called, but what we make the maps out of. When I left the military, went back to New York, the job that I enjoyed doing was working in a photo lab. The first one was Berkeley on 43rd Street and I think Lexington Avenue or something like that. It went from there. And I left photography for a while. And I went to St. Peter's University for an undergraduate, and then I moved to Iowa for some more degrees, came back, and my interest in photography again began when I started going to Harlem Vet Center, and Terry and Yael, the first time I just joined with a bunch of other folks, and one of the things that photography did for me personally was during the lockdown, from 2000 to 2000, whatever, and still till today, Terry and Yael, we had a photo class every week, and we would do a whole bunch of different, stuff like going out and in my yard and taking silhouettes of myself, and during the pandemic, even though for many of the classes that they was teaching, I guess they weren't getting paid for it, they just volunteered. But it kept a lot of us from going crazy. And I'm back into photography.
Yeah, I think that personal connection, and that the way that it's both an art form that you practice on your own, but something that you're also experiencing in a group
Yes.
and working towards a group project and sharing with each other is one of the things that makes it so extraordinary. And I think that itself can be really healing. And I mean, how about your experience with the communal aspect of photography? Alberto, do you have a similar, have you ever really been part of a group photographing?
I don't know. I mean, maybe through JHP more than anything, really. I mean, I was always just the type to just grab my camera and go, and it's probably one of the things I liked about it, because I always thought I would get into film, and then film, I just realized I may as well have just stayed in the Marines. I mean, film productions are just crazy. They're like a military operation. I mean, they're amazing. It's impressive. It's amazing, but I really like the idea of just taking my camera and going. But as far as communal, aspects of photography, I'd say more through JHP and teaching and some of the workshops we do where we're going around and shooting together.
Yeah. It's interesting. Both of you showed the photos that I showed of Vernon's, and the photos that you showed, Alberto, were all from outside of New York City. But I'm curious about your experience of photographing in New York. And do you have tips for people who are photographing around the city? What's your approach to the city?
There's actually, that's actually funny, because maybe that was, I don't know if is it communal, if it's just two of you, but
Sure.
I actually did do some shooting. Like, it was interesting shooting around the city during COVID. I went out with Mark Seliger. We went out and we drove around and stuff and did some shooting, while everything was kind of locked down. And then when things started to kind of go a little sideways with the George Floyd protests, and things started kind of unraveling. We were driving around in this old truck of his, and just kind of like shooting around the city, and I did some of that on my own as well. But yeah, it's New York is it's funny. You don't think about it much when you live here. You don't think about it as much when you live here, but for people around the world, there's something really crazy, intense, and magical about New York, that they love seeing imagery from it. And it's a shame, because when I travel everywhere else, I shoot a ton. I don't shoot enough around New York, but I have been working on a project, though, kind of my love letter to New York. I've been working on it for a few years, but I kind of drift in and out of it. But the COVID thing was interesting. It was really, really, I don't know if anyone's seen the film Vanilla Sky, but I mean, standing in Times Square, standing in Herald Square, and not a human, not a vehicle, not a taxi, nothing, and just sitting there with your camera on a tripod in the middle of the street with nothing around is just really, really bizarre. I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone.
I got to say, I already miss those days now that it's crowded again. Vernon, are you coming into town now, or are you coming
yes,
into town?
When the pandemic was, I guess, the first wave was beginning to go away, we went to Central Park and we shot a whole bunch of photographs. There was Yael, Terry, Michelle, and myself. We was in Central Park for a whole day. That was the first time. And then last summer, we went back to Central Park and we explored more of it. I have taken a lot of pictures in New York. I don't take that much in New Jersey. Because, where I live is kind of boring. I take pictures of things that I like. If I like it, I'm going to shoot it. So now that I'm beginning to get back into the city, and I'm able to walk, right? Because I had injured myself, and walking was very difficult for the last couple of months. But now that walking is becoming a lot easier for me, it's time for me to get back into the city and, Washington Square Park. I love shooting in Washington Square Park.
Yeah, there's always something to see.
Yeah.
Well, Vernon, let me know when you come into town, and let's get out and shoot. It'd be fun.
Always, definitely.
It's great. And listen, I hope you can make it to the open house at the Morris-Jumel mansion, because that place is really, really fascinating and fun to photograph. And they also have this beautiful garden and everything. And so you can be outside, you can be inside.
Uh,
And, I was thinking about the connection to historic places and to military history, and just that kind of this sense of place that you get when you're in an historic site and photographing there. And Alberto, I wanted to ask you about the Gettysburg Experience, because we're going to be showing some of the work from some of the weekend workshops that we did at Gettysburg. And I wanted to ask you to talk about that a little bit, and what that experience was like, being in that historic place and doing photography with veterans there.
Yeah, that's been a real honor. I mean, going there, just such hallowed ground, and going there with we was just to get a great group of veterans together for that, and it's I don't even know how to describe it. It's tough. It's almost like a spiritual experience being there, and learning. Every time you go, you learn more about the history and the sacrifices that were made, and it's just a real bonding experience for all the veterans that that sign up for it. I think I always feel like I learn more from them than, I know it's cliche, but I mean, I always do. I always feel like I learn more being there with them, and, seeing how they shoot, looking at the angles they do, and, hearing their stories. You always hear, all these different stories, and, I continue to be friends with some of them, years later, and especially the older guys, the Vietnam guys, the guys that were, those guys are always really interesting, and I like their I don't know, there's something at least the ones that show up, I mean, there's something really kind of oddly, just youthful about them. They're a lot of fun and playful. And it's been an honor and a great experience, that the Gettysburg project.
Thanks. Photography to me is it's something that I see so many photographers who are still shooting into their 90s. You see people, it just seems to be the kind of art form that keeps you young. I don't know whether it's all the walking around and lugging the equipment, or whether it's just the mindset that really does it. But I think we're starting to wind down to the end of this more formal part of the panel discussion before we open it up to the audience. But I'm curious about what role photography plays in your life now. What does it really mean to you in a personal sense at this stage of your life? Both of you.
Go ahead, Vernon.
Photography has done two things for me. It has helped me with my anxiety. I do deal with clinical anxiety. And so when I'm out and I'm shooting, I don't feel or see anything but what I want to shoot. And I got my little nephew, my grandnephew, he takes my camera when I go see him and shoots everything. So he's getting involved in photography. But it helps, with anxiety and PTSD for me. And I love taking photographs of things that people would not necessarily look at. One of the shots that I did 2 summers ago was a building in a park where I live at, and it had a house on top of a house on top of a house. And it was just amazing to me. So, I took that shot. But it assists, it helps in calming me down and focusing. I have a big backyard, and I live in a complex, but we have a big backyard, and I go out there sometimes and I'll see a deer and I'll take a shot. I've taken shots of 40 deers at one time in one park. It's amazing. It's just amazing. Did I answer your question?
You did. Thanks. Thanks. And Alberto, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, similarities there. I mean, for me, I mean, just I'm a different person if I'm at if I'm at a party without my camera, I'm probably a very different person, and it's crazy. I've had people point that out to me that you know, that when I pick up the camera, it's just like, just, I don't know. I always I liken it to the it's like my Iron Man suit. You know, just, I don't know. There's something that, you know, I feel a lot more able to engage with people or just jump in, because I've always been I was curious since I was a kid about things, and always wanting to learn and always wanting to explore and stuff. And there's just something really cool about having that kind of tool to kind of wedge your way into things. So yeah, it's been great. I love it. I still feel like I'm learning. And you know, I always say that, you know, you go from you know, the Marine Corps, which I really enjoyed, and you're shooting this thing that's designed for, you know, taking life, and then you get out and you pick up a camera and you're shooting something that captures life, you know, and kind of saves it, and it's really kind of cool. And I mean, not that the rifle can't save lives also. I mean, that's why I joined the Marine Corps as well. I mean, it's, you know, there's that aspect to it too. But I mean, it's just, it's interesting. There's similarities, you know, even the way you shoot, you know, I enjoyed both.
I see your marksmanship when I see you photographing. I see the way you hold yourself and the way that you hold the camera, and they're very deliberate.
You know, I was at a Google event for Google Veterans Network, and they had some speakers there. And it was funny because I was shooting with a long lens, and the way I was shooting, the position, the way I had my knee propped, or my elbow propped on my knee, and the way that I, you know, everything kind of tucked in, and the way I was shooting my camera, I had a retired general come up to me and asked me, he asked me what branch. He said, "You were either Marine Corps or Army Special Forces." And I said, "Wow." I said, "How'd you know that, sir?" I said, "Marine." And he said, "I could tell by the way you shoot that thing." The way you were shooting your camera, the way you were there, you had like all the fundamentals were there. Yeah. So.
Well, thanks. Thank you, guys. Let's open it up. Megan, I'll hand it back to you if you've been taking questions.
Thank you all for those really insightful and personal reminiscences. That was really powerful. So it looks like in the chat we have some question. We have a question from Thomas, and I'm assuming this is for Alberto. How does working with or teaching veterans differ from teaching other populations? What do you add to your curriculum? I guess that could apply to you as well, Miriam.
You know, working with veterans, there's a certain language. I mean, there's just a certain language that I think a lot of veterans relate to. I think the way that we were taught, the way we were trained, the way that we learn, you know, there's actually a military method of instruction. And yeah, and I think it's, I don't want to say it's easier, but it's easier. They just, you know, when I'm breaking things down and just kind of like, I don't know, it's like we're just speaking a similar language, and they can relate to it, because there are a lot of similarities, like I said, you know, with the camera and marksmanship. And yeah, I would just say that it's just, for me, it's easy and it's fun, and it's fun connecting with for, at least for me, it's been fun. I think for the veterans in the classes as well. I think that, you know, when you get out, I think it's kind of one of the universal things you'll find is that one of the things that most people miss when they get out, you know, obviously it's not the being up at, you know, 0 dark 30 and, you know, being in the cold weather and rain, or, you know, hot desert. It's the people. You miss the people. And when you like, I could tell you right now that, you know, just met Vernon, but I know one day he and I are going to hang out in the city. We're going to take
Yeah.
pictures. We're going to go around, and we're going to be fast friends. We're going to be old friends, like right off the bat. And that's just how it is. It's a shared experience in history that we have.
To have that kind of bond and frame of reference.
You know,
so
one
that
of the
you
things
connect.
that happens with veterans, we don't really talk about our experience with civilians, but when we get together, we know, we don't have to say anything, but we know how everything is, and we become friends real easy because of our shared experience, whether it was the same or whether it was different, but because of our background with the military, we connect.
So Karen from the chat also is chiming in to express what photography means to her. And she said, to me, photography is like a visual language. The best is when a young photo student has their aha moment for the first time. And Sean also, who some of you may already know, shared that photography taught me about perspective, which I think Vernon mentioned, and how easy it is to change your perspective, which is so useful for life in general. And I totally agree with Alberto about how the camera becomes an extension of yourself. Great insights. Thank you both. Michael actually has a question, and I was thinking about this too when you were talking about Gettysburg, how the Civil War was really the first time that photography was really employed during battle, and especially the aftermath of battle with Matthew Brady. And Michael has a question about contemporary combat photography. He wants to know, what do you think of the combat photography that has been coming out of the war in Ukraine?
I think it's I mean, obviously it's heartbreaking with the imagery that's coming back. I think it's important for people to see. I think it's important that there are people willing to risk their lives to to share it with the world and kind of report on it and bear witness to it. I worry that there are. I think there are. I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted on it sometimes, where I think that some of it is very noble and altruistic. You know, the pursuit for some people, and then I think there are others for whom I think that it's kind of a morbid, kind of weird thing that they romanticize it, and they don't realize the danger that they're putting themselves in, and they don't realize that bullets and bombs don't have names on them, names and addresses, and that it's I don't know. I mean, war photography is kind of a weird kind of thing where there are times when I think I acknowledge how important it is, and then I think there are other ones that are just kind of, there are some out there where I'm uncomfortable with it, where I think they're just kind of glory hounds and looking for a Nobel Prize, or looking for a gallery exhibition of prints of people maimed in war, or people getting blown up, or the aftermath and everything. And they're sitting there dodging and burning these things and making these gorgeous 30 by 40 prints of hell, and profiting greatly off of it. And I don't know that I'm not comfortable with that aspect of it. So
That exploitative aspect.
Pardon me?
That exploitative aspect.
That's right. Yeah. It's kind of war porn.
For me, it's sad. It's very sad. What I stopped looking at him, because in my mind, that young lady in Vietnam naked running is going to show up again. So I don't want to see that. and to me, it's extremely sad. I don't want to. I don't, it makes me ask, how can people be as evil and destructive to others as we are seeing happening in Ukraine and all over the world? So I just don't look at them. I just don't want to see that image of, I'm sure that y'all know what I'm talking about, that girl.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the thing is that those images, there are great arguments that those images helped stop the Vietnam War. That it was images like that that helped stop it. But at the same time, I also, like I said, there was a great issue, and I want to say it was American Photo, where they had these interviews with all these, and maybe Miriam might remember this, where they had all these, former combat photographers, like legendary combat photographers, interviewed, and it was maybe, I don't know how many of them there were, but it was really interesting. That really kind of made me think a lot about that topic and hearing their perspectives on it. And a lot of them were pretty much saying to young people that want to go do that, you have no idea how dangerous it is. And looking back, it was pretty crazy. And, it was probably not the best idea. And again, that's tempered by me saying that, for those who are doing it, for noble reasons, it's important. I mean, we need to know what's going on out there. We need to see what's going on out there. And I think it is an important role that those war photographers play, but I think it's a very, I don't think it's something to be taken lightly, or for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think also that that war photographers are affected by a lot of the same trauma and stress and difficulty re-entering peacetime as many veterans do. I think that there's a lot of similarities between their experience, and especially depending on where they are. But because sometimes you're right in the middle of it, and with contemporary warfare, there is no front line. I mean, everybody's right in the middle of it, and there's no way to step out of the line of fire in some ways for a lot of people. It can be a very intense and traumatic experience that needs some recovery time. And it's interesting to me. I've heard recently from one of the sergeants at the Army's combat camera unit. And these are photographers who are active duty military who are photographing for the armed services. And each branch has its own unit. The Army's is the largest, and so they get these photographers have training in service, and they're photographing as part of their military careers. And as we have been pulling out of a lot of overseas combat, out of a lot of combat operations, they need a new mission and are trying to figure out what their role is in a change in military, and are interested also in volunteering with us, working with us in whatever way. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what the experience of people who are actually photographing for the armed services bring to their engagements within the United States. And so that's going to be an interesting thing. I'm looking for ways to work with some of these people.
If I could plug a book it's not my own book, but it's on the topic of returning from war, and it's an amazing book, is by Sebastian Junger. It's called Tribe, and that's I would really recommend that. It's an amazing book.
And how do you spell the last name? Is it like Younger as in older, younger?
Junger. Yeah, that helps
Okay.
And Sebastian.
I will add that to our list. So for every virtual parlor chat program that we have additional program resources. Everyone who is registered tonight will receive a follow-up email with a link to these. I can also place that in the chat. And so I will definitely add that book to that page. And any other tips that any of you have for someone who's interested in learning more about photography, other than having you as teachers and in the workshop? Any sort of pointers you can provide?
There's so much information out there. There's so many different ways of learning, depending, everybody's got a different style of learning. Mm-hmm. and a different way of connecting. And if you look, you can find a way of learning photography that works for you, whether that's through reading, whether that's through being in a class, whether it's through finding a mentor and following somebody around and carrying their equipment and learning on the spot, or whether it's through just picking up a camera, even if it's the one on your phone, and just practicing and teaching yourself. And I think the more you do, one of the reasons that we do things the way that we do at Josephine Herrick Project, one of our most important tenets, I think, of our classes is that it's participatory. That if you're not making it, if you're not actually doing it, you're not really learning how to photograph. If you really want to understand photography, you can look at photographs and be able to talk about them and develop tremendous visual literacy. But it really helps to practice and just to do it and have fun. Go play and explore and have fun with it. That's my biggest tip.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's let me see if I'm okay. I think it's like wanting to learn how to play guitar. I mean, the more you have that guitar in your hand, the more you're going to learn to do it. So it's the same thing. If you want to learn, pick up the camera and just start snapping, just start shooting. Books are great, videos are great, all that stuff, but the real learning is just going to be by doing it.
Yeah, I also believe that if you are taking a photo of something, there is no good or bad photos. Not everyone is going to like it. Some folks are going to love it. Some folks are going to hate it. But as long as you're satisfied with it, it's a good photo.
That's great advice, Vernon.
That is very great advice, especially for people who, like me, may be recovering perfectionists. But if you're satisfied, it's a good photo.
I would add one more thing is if you have access to like something unique, like, I don't know, let's say you're part of a group that does, some kind of folkloric dance from some part of the world or whatever. Like if you're around that and you have access to it that other people might not normally have, and it's something that interests you already, start with that, lean into that and shoot it and share that with people, because that's always cool to me, is seeing photos that somebody took of something that, I don't know, tractor pull or some kind of rodeo or something that like they're part of, and then they shot it, or a dancer who gets into shooting dancers, and it's like I look at their work and I'm just like, that's amazing, because that person has an access and an understanding that most of us wouldn't.
So the passion that you have for a topic can really sort of shine through. Well, I want to thank all of you for such a wonderful and wide-ranging and poignant conversation this evening. Miriam, do you have any final thoughts?
Just to thank you for putting this together and inviting us to talk with you, and all of you in the audience for being part of the conversation. I really loved seeing what you said in the chat, and stay in touch. If you're a veteran and you want to join our classes, we have new ones starting all the time. We're going to be starting some new programs soon. And if you're not a veteran and would like to get involved with us either as a participant in a class or as a teaching artist or in any other way as a supporter, reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you.
Again, thank you all for joining us for this evening of conversation. And I hope those of you who are in the New York City area will be able to join us in person to see the opening of the exhibition At Ease, Photographs by Military Veterans in New York, opening on June 16th. So Miriam, Alberto, Vernon, thank you so much. Thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you, Alberta. Hopefully we can get together and do some shooting.